Today's question comes to us from a large enterprise, and they ask, how do I simplify my innovation disclosure form? Sometimes they're called Invention Disclosure Forms, IDFs, and these forms are typically used within an enterprise so that inventors can fill them out with a bunch of information to then give to the patent prosecutor who's going to draft up the patent application. Sometimes that same form is used so that there can be some vetting within the enterprise. Maybe there's a patent committee or somebody that decides whether or not money should be spent to file a patent application. And these forms come in many flavors. I've seen them as long as like 10, 12 pages. And what tends to happen is if your form is overly complex or too long, people just don't fill them out. And if you're trying to get people to engage with your patent program and bring forward new ideas, a long form is going to slow them down. And especially if there's a lot of things that they don't understand, people don't like to engage with things that they can't understand. So years ago I had a client that challenged me to get it down to one page. They said, if it were just one page, we might have our software developers filling out the form. So what I was able to do is I was able to get it down to one page, and I put in, for each question, I think 5 questions, I put in some hidden text that explained what I needed for that section so that they could go in there and very quickly fill them out. What I found out was that even with that, the engagement was somewhat spotty. Maybe this was a unique enterprise and yours is going to be far different, but needless to say, the longer the form, the less comprehensible it is, the less engagement you're going to have. So what is the bare minimum, right? What is the bare minimum that's needed to capture so that someone can perhaps follow up and get more information, or perhaps get through the whole process with that? So, you need to know who the contacts are, who the inventors are. So name and email address, phone number, sort of thing, so that somebody can contact them later. Especially as you give it to outside counsel, they're going to need that to follow up with them. You might ask them what the city and state of their residency is, or maybe their citizenship. Sometimes that comes up and there's some issues with regard to citizenship. But you really don't need more. You don't need their home address anymore. You don't need witnesses to sign it or anything like that. That's something that's no longer needed in these forms. Frame it with the title. There should be some sort of title that they can give this innovation, and then a very short description, 2 or 3 sentences that talk about the uniqueness of the technology that they've developed, and how that uniqueness has advantages over what other people do. So here's a unique technological solution that we have, and here's how it's better or different than what others have. And then it's also nice to know if they can rank it. Somebody's going to have to rank this thing. Presumably you're going to get a lot more ideas than you have budget to spend on capturing it. So some sort of ranking. Ranking can be very complex. I found something simple, 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. People understand that sort of scale. I've seen, I saw one vendor was selling a tool that had 14 different dimensions on the ranking. Same thing, the complexity was the enemy there, and you couldn't get a good answer out of it. But people generally know 1 through 10. What I often get asked, and inventors really aren't that capable of answering this question, is how patentable it is. Is a 1 through 10 on the patentability of it. And that's hard. You know, at Triangle IP, we're working on some algorithms to be able to automatically answer that question. But in the meantime, you can ask your patent prosecutor what their guess is on how patentable it is, so that a patent committee then can have a brief description of what's going on, an idea on how at least others thought it was valuable. They may want to change that ranking, and how likely you are to get the patent, how patentable it is. And then beyond that, bare minimum, that's kind of the bare minimum. Brief description, contact information, some sort of valuation and patentability. Beyond that, you know, having the ability for whoever's filling out the form to include additional information that they might have on it. Maybe they have a presentation, maybe they have given, you know, drafted a paper, any material that they might have, any block diagrams, any sketches. I generally don't want to slow down the process with them writing up a big paper or something like that, because that takes time and they may not get around to it. But often they have something that they've used elsewhere that can set the stage. So if you were to approve it and hand it off to a patent prosecutor for them to go about filing a patent application on it, all that material, the more the better, right? But not necessarily requiring the person filling out the form to draft it fresh for this purpose, right? Hopefully there's something else that you can use that's already been done. And that generally should be enough, right? And I know a lot of people are going to watch this video and they're going to say, well, you know, what about the prior art? Shouldn't they talk about the prior art? A lot of people don't even know what that term means, right? So you're going to ask a question and they don't know what it means, or they might answer it improperly. All that can be figured out down the line, or somebody can have a phone call. So think about what your enterprise needs and what people are trained to understand, right? There can be questions on whether or not, you know, government funding was involved if you're an enterprise that regularly works on government-funded projects. That's something you can add in there. There might be questions on whether or not it's been disclosed, right? In most countries, you have to file your patent either before you've disclosed it or released it, or very soon thereafter. In the US, we enjoy a 1-year grace period in that regard. So you might ask them about that. But again, they may not understand what the moving parts there are on it. Certainly these additional questions, put them at the end, right? And encourage your folks either to reach out to folks that can help within the enterprise, explain some of these things. Sometimes somebody should just sit down with them and help them through the form, at least the first few times, so that they'll fill them out and they're not so intimidated. But you can have a form that's just a few questions, and that should be enough to follow up, and it's going to get you 90% there. That remaining 10%, that's good for the process. It'll make writing up the patent less expensive. It'll help get in front of the people vetting the idea, help get them the information so that they can make better decisions. But just be prepared that people are not going to perhaps fill all that out. And either you can facilitate that completion of the form, or you can just take the forms half filled out, or you can have a much shorter form. But deciding that, the strategy in that regard, is going to help you get full engagement with your program. So I hope that's helpful and that answers the questions. If you have any comments or further questions, please put them down below and we'll get to it in our next video. Thanks so much. Stay safe.